July of this coming year, July of 2010, won't matter to anybody. It'll just be a bunch of people out there playing with themselves in total isolation because they won't have any real effective power anymore due to the events that will occur between now and then. Again, that sort of makes sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not saying that the Fed's going to go disappear as of August of this year, but the derivative crisis that's already in the way, already occurring, that'll become visible between the 16th and the 22nd, and likely more closer to the 22nd, is actually setting the stage for the next phase. Now, if you're in a standard economic model paradigm like the Keynesian kind of economics, then you would be looking at our current period of time as a potential W-shaped, quote, recovery or flow pattern into recovery. And if you were looking at that period of stuff from that particular viewpoint, they would see us sitting right on the apex of the middle of the W and about to go down the next leg, knowing, theoretically, from their viewpoint, that when we hit the bottom of that next leg, that would be it, and then we'd be into recovery mode, and this would be able to be plotted out. And thus they would say, oh, okay, maybe the second half of this year is going to be ugly because we're going to go into this next down leg, but then from that point on, happy days are here again, prosperity is just around the corner, blah, blah, blah. But what they're missing is a whole lot of other impacts that basically make their model an incomplete and inaccurate representation of what's going on in the global markets. Now, our data suggests that things like that hyperinflation is coming, that this hyperinflation is going to affect things all the way at market levels, all the way up to the market structures themselves. That is in the sense that if we get hyperinflation and it goes to the point where it's even remotely like Weimar or Zimbabwe, then the markets are moot. There's no point to even dealing with them because you'd go on in the morning and assets would depreciate more in a single day than they had run up in the previous year, or vice versa. The level of volatility would be reflected not by the actual, quote, value of the paper asset, but rather by the notational value on it relative to your currency. So if you get up in the morning and 2 Canadian dollars were equal to 1 Canadian dollar, but by the time dinner rolls around, you get 6 Americans for your Canadians, and thus for 2 Canadians you get 12 American dollars, well, then stocks are cheap for you, and you may go on in and play around with them because it's relatively meaningless. And we're rapidly approaching that period of time. In our data, it really kind of kicks off around the 25th of October. And then amongst all of that, we have this other stuff of the release of the swine flu into the wild, so to speak, and dealing with the components of the flu itself, as well as the nut jobs out there producing harmful substances on the theory that they can make money getting you to accept them. So it's going to be a rather strange fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so in October we've got economic woes, but we've also got the swine flu, we've got the vaccinations, and we've got this alien wars. Alien wars?
Yeah, that essentially begins this October with, we've been talking about alien wars for a number of years in our data. We'll pick it up on the other side. Yeah.
I know, everybody needs to go out and get a stiff drink. I think I need to go. We'll be right back. We're talking to Clif from Half Past Human, and we'll take it up right there with alien wars starting in October. You're listening to Radio RMN on the Micro Effect Broadcast Network. We'll be back. Welcome back. This is Radio RMN. My name is Raylan Allen, and I'm talking with Clif from Half Past Human, and we left you with the ominous feeling that the aliens are going to attack in October.
Well, it's not quite that way.
It's not that.
No, it's not that. Our language begins with archetypes and then gradually drills down to detail. And so around 2004, we had this new cluster of language that developed in our model space that we collected off into this entity, and it's been forecasting this juxtaposition of two large data sets. And so one data set was headed by aliens or extraterrestrials, and the other data set was by war. And so we merged those into a single descriptor called alien wars. Now, that is forecasting language, that is to say the appearance of language in our future that relates to those two concepts in this larger set. And beyond that, it's a guess at this stage. The further out we see something, that is to say we begin seeing this 2003, 2004, and yet it seems to have an extremely long-range impact and won't start showing up until 2009. And so around 2004, we started forecasting for about the summer of 2009 that we were going to get into the beginning of the language for alien wars, which was going to peak in 2011. Now, the way our stuff works, we don't really get a description of what's going on. We get a vague sort of a description of what the language will be like that will be used after that, whatever it is, happens. And so in this case, we'd said that the first part of that language would show up this year in this temporal marker chain of events, and indeed it has. Now, the language is showing up in a funny way. It's not, or a curious way. It's not showing up in the sense of, Martian space aliens attack Cincinnati or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. But instead, we're actually seeing in the mainstream press the juxtaposition of language relating to war and to the interplanetary coming from NASA, in the sense that the mainstream press use language like NASA to bomb another planet, in this case, the moon. NASA to, launch a rocket projectile weapon against the moon, and so on. And so we saw the beginning of the Alien Wars language in this curious fashion coming out from the language around NASA. Now, we have to say that this is a sort of a good thing in the sense that it validates the chain of temporal markers that got us to this point, and it also gives us further confidence in those temporal markers that take us all the way up to the peak of this particular linguistic set in 2011. It's probably not a good thing because basically I'm sure none of us really want to have any kind of an alien war. We got enough problems as it is without inviting others to come on down and cause a mess here. So,
and do you associate that with what Kissinger said, that we'll all unite as one world government when the aliens attack?
Yeah, it very well could be that kind of a situation, and it very well could be that what the data is actually guiding us towards is the understanding that there might be a giant planetary-level false flag event to try and institute a new world order. But let me point out we have two competing streams of reality here, okay? The two streams of reality are basically postulate A and postulate B. And postulate A says that at this point, the powers that be want to claim all the power on the planet and guide us all, rule us all, whatever, into the future as a part of a giant intergalactic civilization. And as Kissinger said, and Zbigniew Brzezinski and some of these other people have all noted that we'll all jump behind if there's an external threat, including Ronald Reagan. They've all pointed this all out.
Right.
Okay, and so that's postulate one. Now, within the same level of data sources for the same powers that be, there's a secondary thread that says, and which is backed up by such strange things as the Georgia Guidestones and others, that say that we want to eliminate, some huge chunk of the population of the planet because we think that meaning the powers that be, think that there's too many of you great unwashed masses here, and we need to get rid of some of you. We don't need that many of you. We just only need 500 million slaves, not 6.5 billion. You guys are just getting out of hand. We got to get rid of you. The two are actually not mutually exclusive, but one makes no sense relative to the other, and that is the powers that be, if they were attempting to generate a one-world government in order to deal with the universe as a united species, I don't see them wanting to get rid of two-thirds of the populace. They're going to need that two-thirds of the populace as we spread out into space or not. Mm-hmm. And if it's our destiny to be run into confrontation in the process of spreading out in universe, then again, you're going to need that two-thirds of the populace. So it doesn't make any sense relative to recent moves. I have yet to reconcile in the data and or my own personal opinion what is actually going on relative to this, because there appears to be both threads or both memes are moving simultaneously. We have plenty of evidence that the release of the latest this swine flu thing is a, if not deliberate, was a, well, let's let it happen kind of an instance. And we also have plenty of evidence that these people that are manufacturing the vaccines are not doing anything in the interest of the general populace. And so it begs the question about the idea of a planetary reduction of populace. At the same time, you see them getting all generated up for the alien wars, and you start seeing the language showing up in the mainstream press just as we'd forecast. If that's the case, if that temporal chain continues, then the next big thing relative to this should come out in early November. And it should lead to some level of contact, if not disclosure, then acceptance on a very broad level as part of a paradigm change by, say end of March, first part of April next year.
Now, I do know there are people within Obama's administration that have been working to get the knowledge of extraterrestrials released to humanity. Could it be something as simple as that we've got a disclosure press conference?
I doubt it. And the reason I say that is it may indeed be part of it. That might even be a trigger for it. But here's the issue. There's a lot of the language that is in the wars section that indicates conflict and contention. And to a certain extent, you may be correct, because instantly, the minute that there's any kind of an official U.S. government acknowledgement of space aliens, extraplanetary intelligence, whatever, then there's about a $4 trillion or greater per year global corporate industry that is at risk, and that is the energy industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the agricultural industry. And those guys are going to be very irritated, I think.
And Clif, let's take it up right there that there's a lot of people that are going to be irritated, especially the ones that are making the vaccines for this flu they want us all to die of. And so we're talking with Clif High of Half Past Human, and we're talking about what his WebBot project is seeing in the immediate future. You're listening to Radio RMN, and we'll be back. You are listening to Radio RMN. My name is Raylan Allen, and I am talking with Clif High from Half Past Human. And one of the things that his WebBot project is showing him is aliens. And we just started saying that the vaccine makers have an awful lot to lose if the good aliens appear. And so I'm going to let you take up from where you left off there.
Yeah, it isn't just the vaccine makers. It's all of what we want to think of as like a global corporate establishment. Because bear in mind that if we have any level of extraterrestrial contact confirmed, then some natural follow-ons to that instantly are going to cause disruption. And that is the sense that these alien guys, they're not going to show up here in spaceships filled with 55-gallon drums of oil, puttering their way across the universe that way. So whatever their energy source is, we're likely to find it introduced to our society just by virtue of the fact that they show up here. That's all that's required. We don't even have to see it. We'll be able to say, aha, that exists, and therefore we can invent it ourselves. And the next thing you know, the entire establishment infrastructure based on scarcity falls. Why is this? Well, because the introduction of what people call zero-point energy or consciousness energy or free energy, any of those terms has with it some corollaries. And that is that if one is able to create energy from what's known as the Dirac sea or the vacuum or the continuous creation stream, same name for different names for the same thing, then you're in a situation where you have the ability to, if you will, warp or manipulate reality. And in that sense, you're into the next stage, which would be like the replicator food things on the Star Trek series, where you just push a button and you've got, hot tea or whatever you want. And it doesn't require the actual production of any tea plant anywhere. Now, a lot of people might argue that that's the ultimate in synthetics, and you wouldn't have the same level of food and nutrients and so on. However, that's kind of immaterial. Because then, again,